The truth was finally out, and it was bigger than anyone had imagined. Chuck Schumer and top Democrats had held a secret meeting with Zelenskyy just hours before he was set to meet with President Trump, the purpose to kill Trump's peace deal before it ever had a chance. Let that sink in. The very same Democrats who spent years claiming to fight for democracy were now actively working against America's democratically elected president. They weren't trying to help Ukraine. They weren't trying to stop the war. They were trying to stop Trump, and they almost got away with it. It started as just a rumor, a whisper passed between insiders. Then the pieces started falling into place. Chris Murphy, a Democratic senator, posted about the meeting on X, bragging about their conversation with Zelenskyy just hours before he stepped into the Oval Office, just finished a meeting with President Zelenskyy here in Washington. Murphy wrote he wasn't trying to hide it. He was proud Zelenskyy, according to Murphy, had assured them that Ukraine would never support a fake peace agreement where Putin gets everything he wants. But wait a second, who said it was a fake deal, who told Zelenskyy that this was a bad idea, and more importantly, who gave Democrats the right to interfere in foreign policy behind the president's back. These weren't just some low-level staffers whispering in dark corridors. These were top Democrats, Chuck Schumer, Adam Schiff, high-ranking officials from the Biden and Obama administrations. They sat down. With Zelenskyy, they pressured him, gave him a narrative before he even walked into the White House, and when he finally met with Trump, he was no longer willing to negotiate inside the Oval Office. The atmosphere was tense. This was supposed to be a step toward peace, but something was off. Trump leaned forward, scanning Zelenskyy's face. The Ukrainian president was different from the last time they spoke. He wasn't just, he was hostile. "I don't think this deal works for us," Zelenskyy said, crossing his arms. Trump narrowed his eyes. "That's not what you said before." A brief silence. Zelenskyy shifted slightly in his seat. "Things have changed," he muttered. "Things have changed." Trump repeated, voice sharp. "Did someone change your mind?" Zelenskyy looked away. He didn't answer. That was the moment Trump knew this wasn't about Ukraine anymore. This was about stopping him. The Democrats had done their job well. They had gotten to Zelenskyy first. They had filled his head with just enough doubt, just enough fear, to make sure that when he sat across from Trump, there would be no deal. And when the meeting ended, when Trump left the room without the peace agreement he had been working toward, the Democrats struck their final blow. Chuck Schumer stepped in front of the cameras, standing talon smug, and uttered the words they had planned all along. "Donald Trump," he declared, "is doing Putin's dirty work. It was scripted. It was calculated. It was all a setup." And just like that, the narrative was set in stone. Trump wasn't the president trying to end a war. He was the villain, and the media, they played their part perfectly. CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post, they all ran with the headline immediately. Trump sides with Putin over Ukraine. Zelenskyy stands up to Trump's pro-R agenda. Schumer. Trump cannot be trusted on foreign policy. It was all so perfectly timed, so meticulously orchestrated, that you almost had to admire the sheer audacity of it. They had sabotaged Trump's peace deal, and now they were blaming him for it. And as the news cycle exploded with accusations, investigations, and more Russia-ties nonsense, one simple fact was buried under all the noise: the war could have ended that day. But the Democrats, they didn't want peace. They wanted control. And they were willing to sacrifice anything, even thousands of lives, to make sure Trump didn't win. But this time they made a mistake, because someone had been paying attention. Someone had been putting the pieces together, and someone was about to expose the entire operation. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Chris Murphy thought it was over. He had tweeted about the meeting. He had put it out there in plain sight. And why wouldn't? The media wasn't going to question it. The Democrats weren't going to be held accountable. They had won, or at least that's what they thought. But in their arrogance, they left a trail that led straight to the truth. This wasn't just a routine diplomatic discussion, it was a direct intervention, and when you looked at the people in that meeting, everything became crystal clear. Chuck Schumer, Chris Murphy, Anthony Blinken Victoria, Nan Suze, and Rice, Alexander Vindman. These weren't just politicians, they were the same people who had been shaping U.S. foreign policy for decades, regardless of who the American people elected. And now they had done it again. They met with Zelenskyy just hours before his meeting with Trump. They pressured him, they fed him a narrative, and when he walked into the Oval Office, he wasn't there to negotiate, he was there to shut it down. This deal won't work for Ukraine, Zelenskyy had said, crossing his arms. Trump didn't buy it. That's not what you said before. Zelenskyy hesitated. Things have changed. Trump leaned forward, or did. Someone change your mind? No answer, just silence, and that's when Trump knew they got to him first. The meeting ended, the deal was dead, and before Trump could even react, Chuck Schumer was already in front of cameras delivering the line they had prepared in advance. Donald Trump, he declared, is doing Putin's dirty work. It was a setup. And just like that, the media had their script. CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post. Trump sides with Putin over Ukraine. Zelenskyy stands up to Trump's pro-Russia agenda. The entire operation was flawless, but here's where they made their mistake. They thought no one would question them. They assumed. No one would connect the dots. But someone did. Chris Murphy's tweet, meant to be a harmless flex, accidentally exposed the timeline. And once people started digging, the questions started piling up. Why was Zelenskyy's stance completely different before and after the meeting? Why were former Obama officials in the room? Why was there no media coverage of this meeting beforehand? The answers led to one chilling realization. This wasn't just about stopping Trump. This was about keeping the entire war industry running. The very same people who told Zelenskyy to reject the deal, they had deep ties to the military-industrial complex Victorianuland. One of the key figures had been involved in Ukraine's government shakeups for years. Anthony Blinken had spent years lobbying for increased military support to Ukraine. The war ending meant one thing: the money stopped, not just for Ukraine, but for the defense contractors, the weapons manufacturers, the entire machine that profits from endless conflict. Trump's peace deal would have shut it all down. That's why they couldn't let it happen. But there was a problem. People were waking up. Chris Murphy's tweet had been screenshotted thousands of times. The connections were being made. The truth was spreading. And the Democrats, they were losing control of the narrative. If they couldn't stop the truth from getting out, their entire operation would be exposed, and for the first time, Americans were asking the right questions. This wasn't just political. This was treason? The Oval Office had never felt this cold. Trump sat behind the resolute desk, hands folded, eyes locked on Zelenskyy. Across from him, the Ukrainian president sat stiffly, his expression unreadable. Something was off. Just days ago they had spoken. Over the phone, Zelenskyy had sounded hopeful, even eager about the prospect of a negotiated peace. But now, sitting in front of Trump, he was different. Distant defense. Trump leaned forward. You told me this was what you wanted. Zelenskyy didn't flinch. I have to think about Ukraine security. Trump's jaw tightened. That's exactly what this deal guarantees: a pause, a shift in Zelenskyy's posture, and then the moment that changed everything. This deal, he said, slowly, choosing his words carefully, is not in our best interests. Silence. Trump exhaled, shaking his head. Who got to you? Zelenskyy looked away. And that's when Trump knew. Schumer, Murphy, the same cast of characters who had spent years sabotaging his presidency, they had met with Zelenskyy just hours. Before this meeting, they had filled his head with fear, with doubt. They had pre-programmed his answer before he ever walked into the White House. Trump leaned back in his chair, studying Zelenskyy carefully. You had an opportunity to stop the bloodshed, he said, to bring ability back to your country. Zelenskyy's hands clenched into fists. You don't understand, he muttered. Trump's voice was ice-numbery. Understand perfectly. And in that moment, the truth was clear. Zelenskyy wasn't rejecting the deal because it was bad for Ukraine. He was rejecting it because he had no choice. The Democrats had made sure of that. The meeting ended without a handshake, without a deal, without a single step toward peace. And as Zelenskyy walked out of the room, Trump already knew what would happen next. The smear campaign was about to begin. Just as planned, minutes after the meeting, Schumer stepped in front of the cameras. His tone was measured, rehearsed. He didn't need to think about his words. He already knew exactly what he was going to say. President Trump has chosen to side with Vladimir Putin over the Ukrainian people boom. The headline was set. The talking points were ready. The media had their orders. CNN ran with it first. Trump's failed negotiations raised. New. Concerns over Russian influence. Then MSNBC Zelenskyy heroically resists Trump's pro-Tin agenda. Then the Washington Post Schumer. Trump is doing Putin's dirty work. It was all so perfectly timed they had sabotaged the deal, and now they were blaming him for it within hours. Every news cycle, every late-night talk show, every panel discussion was locked onto the same message: Trump had betrayed Ukraine. But here's the thing. The American people weren't buying it for the first time in a long time. Something was different. People were connecting the dots. They saw Schumer's statement. They saw the